So good morning.
Good
Uh,
morning.
my name's Donna Ingham. I think I know all of you. And we're gathered here together this morning to talk about the business of storytelling. You all are already in the business, so I think we need to be more concerned with sharing ideas. I don't know whether I've got anything new to offer or not, but maybe some areas that open up that we can all talk about. I think when I think about people going into storytelling, uh, I always want to ask, do you really want to quit your day job? Um, Unless there are people like me and some of you, I think, who are retired, and therefore we've got some income. Some of us, of course, are on Social Security too. We take it from whatever corner we can. Bernadette, I'm guessing you may be the one among us who is still actively um, doing storytelling as a business. I know you're an actress. I know you write books, but I'll pick on. I know you're going to split your time this morning, so I'll pick on you first to say, are there any things? Well, first of all, how did you get into storytelling? That's a question I think all of us are asked at one time or another. Um, how was it for you?
It was sort of inadvertent for me. I'm actually going to talk about this a little bit during the power of personal narrative this afternoon. But I wanted to be an actress, and I ended up working for a children's theatre company. And while I was doing that, we updated folk tales for performance on stage, and I ended up being the actress that was chosen. And so I was telling stories on stage like an actress, but in fact what I was becoming was a storyteller. And so by the time I'd done several years of work with this theatre, I thought I want to do this on my own. But as many of us, I think, may acknowledge, I thought I was the only one. And meeting you was one of those things that changed that. Yeah, another storyteller. Um, but then I realized that there was this whole world out there of folk tales and fairy tales and myths and legends, particularly from England, that weren't really getting shared much anymore. And schools were asking for them. So that's how it began for me. But it was the business side of it was very low key. I didn't have a clue. Like you, I think I learned it as I went along, getting thrown in at the deep end, which is my phrase of the weekend, getting thrown in at the deep end. Um, so for me, it was an inadvertent thing, but probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Yeah,
Well, I think we'd all agree with that. We're happy to have you among in the community, as it were.
thank you.
And Fran, I know your background is academic, and I know you used to come to the little university where I was teaching, and you did workshops and what have you in the summers. Did those have anything to do with storytelling, or was it mostly the science? Or
Which university was that?
Oklahoma Panhandle State
Oh,
University?
yes, indeed. Well, they were about storytelling. In the summer, Panhandle State had these wonderful crunch courses for teachers in the days when they were required to get continuing education units. And 2 8-hour days gave them 1 unit of academic credit. And teachers came from Texas and Colorado and Kansas as well as Oklahoma, and they were wonderful to work with. As motivated adults, they were a lot easier for me to work with than the wet behind the ears high school graduates that I had when I was teaching at Kent State in Ohio, because they didn't have a clue. I did have a lot of um, non-standard students, veterans and returning housewives and people like that, and I loved working with them too. Um, well, yeah, my academic education is in biology, and that's what I was teaching at Kent State. But I've been telling stories since I was a kid, And in fact, I realized recently I probably did my first public performance when I was about 16, because the wife of one of my dad's army buddies asked me to come tell stories to her preschool class. Um, and I learned storytelling as a survival skill as a teenage babysitter. So
Oh, yes, yes.
yes, and my biggest business experience was the 20 years that I planned the tours for Hiroko Fujita, who came
Mhm.
from Japan, and I had to lay out tours. I had to make the contacts. I had to convince people, no, she doesn't tell in English, but yes, you'll understand, etc. And we got to 22 different states. And I found it
Oh.
easier somehow to promote her and plan for her than to do it for myself,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
Um, and so I still, I'm not exactly retired yet. I've just come back from the southwest corner of Oklahoma where I was in Hollis and Altus, kind of left hind elbow, Oklahoma, doing summer library programs
Mhm.
as a biologist talking about dinosaurs. But
There you go. It's ready made for you, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, that was a good one. Anyway, um, I had kind of thought that summer library tour would be my grand finale, but they want me back, so I guess I need some business advice because I didn't make posters or anything to help them.
Mhm.
And I yeah,
Well,
I,
we all know the best kind of advertising is word of mouth, and to be called back is a great compliment, and to establish those kind of relationships
mm,
with, especially with librarians, and so we'll talk about marketing, but I want to come back to your role as a producer, more or less, um, because I think one of the things that I took that list of things off of the Small Business Administration just to give us a framework, but only a half dozen of those I think were really particularly relevant. But one of them uh, had to do with expanding your growing your business, certainly, but expanding your outlook on your business. And I think all of us, in a sense, have to become producers too. And it is more difficult to plan a tour for yourself than to plan
yes,
a tour for somebody else. But one of the first things that's mentioned in that listing that I think is relevant is that you have to think about, if you're going to have any kind of business plan, you're going to have to think about um, the kind of uh, I guess, well, what's out there, who's out there, and what's out there, that kind of research. And I think the word that's used in the listing by the Small Business Administration is to see what the competition is, or I don't think we think about competition so much as storytellers. We're very collegial, and very quick to help one another, to recommend one another, to set up tours or house concerts, or um, avenues for each other to perform. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about the storytelling business is that it's you can go and look at comparative things about other tellers and venues and what have you, but not so much as sizing it up to see if you can oust them and get that place. I don't see that, and so well, I'd like to say we're unique in that particular area. So thank you for getting us started on that, Fran. Debbie, what's your story? Everybody's got a story, a sort of an origin story, as it were.
Well, um, aside from what I did growing up, um, I suppose I really did the focus of it when I was teaching drama at a fine arts elementary school. I always focused on creative drama. So my focus was always on the story and getting kids involved with becoming the story. Um, so I guess I've approached from that point of view. Then a teacher in our community at University of Texas at Permian Basin invited the folk tellers uh, to our community. And she got me to do some things. And I thought, oh, you mean you can go out and do this? Uh, I had no idea in the whole world. And we started a guild and did things like that. And then the powers that be, my daughter became so ill, I had to sort of stop doing anything and live for her. And there was a span of time, I mean, I kept my hand in going to the festivals, but I wasn't teaching, etc. So um, she's supporting me from heaven. And then I got a wonderful support system in my husband. And I've been coming back in, and then Michael threw me into the board, and it was eye-opening, and Elizabeth's been helping. So I don't feel like I have an ongoing repertoire, but I want it, and have been doing some storytelling in the schools, but trying to sell myself and get out there and do it has been a challenge.
It is a challenge. Yeah. All right. So we've got you and Bernadette both coming from drama backgrounds, and Fran academic, and I guess that's where I come from too. Tim, you're the guy who's you're an attorney. You've been a teacher. So what's your story?
Um, I came to work in Dallas at the district attorney's office and was placed in the juvenile section. I started out doing child abuse work and juvenile delinquency work, but after I'd been there for actually not terribly long, they made me a child abuse specialist, and I burned out on doing that in the law. I left the district attorney's office, tried to practice on my own, but realized I was totally burned out. When I had been at the office for only a year, actually, one of my fellow attorneys walked in the office one morning, and I was sitting with my head in my hands, and he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I agreed to come into this section because I liked kids, and all I'm seeing are really damaged kids." And he said, "You need to see some healthy kids," and said, "Go to your church and volunteer." So I had done that, became a junior high Sunday school teacher, and then got into youth ministry and was doing all of that. So the kids would come to me and say, "I've got a question," in Sunday school or youth ministry, and they would ask me a theological question, which, because I was a cradle Episcopalian, I didn't know Bible growing up, and I would give them the lawyer answer, which is, "Golly, that's a great question, and I see we don't have enough time to talk about it today. I promise I will answer it next week," and I would go and study, and I got tired of doing that and signed up for a course that the Episcopal Church offers through Swanee Seminary, University of the South, called Education from Ministry, which is offered in extension. My teacher the first year there taught me, and I was going through this, I think I want to change careers. And on my 40th birthday, my mother and my sister threw me a surprise party and invited a whole bunch of people. And my teacher was there, and she pulled me aside. Her recollection and mine are a little bit different. I recall her saying, "God is calling you to stop practicing law and come teaching." Her recollection, which is probably the more accurate one, is, "Have you considered that God is calling you to come to work teaching?" And I said, "What do I need to do?" And she said, "Redraft your resume. Don't take out your law stuff, but put an emphasis on the work you've been doing in the church." And so I did, and I applied at the Episcopal School of Dallas, where she was the chair of the religion department. And I interviewed, and Father Swan called me the next morning, woke me up, called that early, and said, "We want to offer you the job, but we can't offer you much money." I had thought, if they offer me this job, how little money can they offer me? And boy, I went down to a bare bones amount, and he offered me $100 above that. And I said, it's a sign, and I took the job. He had me come in that day and sign the contract. And although knowing as a lawyer, it was a worthless contract, it was a letter contract, it wasn't enforceable at all. But after I had put my name on the contract, he said, I don't think I mentioned that our chaplain left us at the end of last year. And so, because you're the religion teacher, you'll be responsible for chapel. Is that a problem? I said, no. He said, it's daily chapel. And by the way, we'll expect you to coordinate and lead chapel in the middle school every day and also do some of the upper school chapels. You're not afraid of talking in front of people. And I said, Father Swan, I've been an attorney for 14 years. I've talked in front of judges, I've talked in front of juries. The district attorney's office actually sent me out, and I talked to literally crowds of hundreds of people about my job. I'm not afraid of talking in front of people. He said, fine. And he sent me in, and I walked into my first middle school chapel, and there they sat, arms crossed, their chest, these stern expressions like, okay, what are you going to do? And I led the liturgy, but when it got to the time for the homily, I said, let me tell you a story. And I told the story. And they came up afterwards and were asking me questions. And I said, oh, this is a way I can survive this. Learning to be a teacher. I had a teaching certificate that I had never used when I graduated from college. So I knew what I was doing in there, but I had to put everything together. But this was a new thing. And I said, okay, this is how I'm going to survive this. And I started panic. I went back and read all the old storybooks that I had been read as a child by my grandparents, my parents. I started going to half-priced books and buying everything I could get my hands on, learning all kinds of stories. Then I started drafting some stories of my own, and the kids really liked that. We had chaplain conferences, Father Swan and I, my first few years. And at one of them, when we actually had employed some other chaplains in there, he said, what is an unexpected gift that you bring to your ministry? And I said, I'm not afraid to stand up and tell stories about myself where I look like an ass. And he laughed so hard, made me feel a little bit bad, but it was right. I was being honest. The kids really loved it when I got up and told stories about personal failures. And so I said, okay, I'm going to lean into that. And so my second year at the Episcopal School of Dallas, they were starting to merge with the lower school at St. Michael's School. And we had employed for that year a young man right out of seminary. And he said to me the summer between my first and second year, we'll have to now cover the lower school too. Would you be willing to work with me to do that? And I said, well, yeah, there are two of us. We can juggle the middle school, upper school, lower school between the two of us. And so that got set up. And then he decided he didn't like being a school chaplain, and he left in October. And I was responsible for the lower school chapel every day after that. So I got to where I told stories to middle schoolers and upper schoolers. And then year two, I was going and telling from beginners through sixth grade there. So I got a lot of experience in telling all kinds of different stories. So that's Bernadette, thrown into the deep end is what
I
I
was
was.
going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I became a storyteller. And I'd been doing it for a few years, and Bernadette said it felt like I invented something new here. And I was at half priced books looking at the folklore and myth shelf, and I found a little book published by Finley Stewart, Best Love Stories at the Texas Storytelling Festival. And I opened it up and said, oh my gosh, there are people here in Texas that do this. And so I got involved in Tejas that way, by finding a book and going up to the festival. And it's not about storytelling, it's about me being stupid. But the first time I went up to Denton for the festival, saw a thing in the newspaper. Oh boy, I'd seen the book, so I knew about it. And I drove up and I arrived knowing nothing at about 12 noon. And I walked out onto the Quakertown grounds, tents everywhere, and I started poking my head in tents, and there wasn't anybody there. It was noon. People were at lunch. And I said, well, this is a bust. Nothing's going on here. And I got in my car and drove home. The first year I went to the festival, I heard not a single storyteller. And the next year I saw it advertised, and I called and got Karen Morgan on the phone and said, what do I need to do? And she said, well, what do you want? And I told her what I'd done the previous year. She laughed uproariously and said, why didn't you come to the red registration tent? And I said, there's a red registration tent. And she said, look for a red tent. I will be in there. I will help you. And that's how I actually became involved in Tejas. I went up my second year and actually attended the festival.
Yeah, I love this. All of this, particularly with you and Bernadette talking about discovering that you're actually not the only storyteller working in your area or the state or whatever, and coming from various backgrounds. My story is kind of a fluke story too, about how I got into it. I'd been teaching college English for years and had retired. So that meant I did have a retirement income. And that's always good if you've got something to fall back on. Of course, now I've also got Social Security. So I do have money to pay the rent. I don't have to work as a storyteller in order to keep myself fed and housed and clothed. We could go back to Bernadette at some point because she is a full-time professional storyteller. I guess getting still some residuals from being in a movie, and she does work with the theater and has book sales and what have you. I'll come back to you because I know you want to go to split your time a little bit. But anyway, I'll tell my origin story too. I think it's important in the business of storytelling to know your origin story, to be willing to share it with other people, colleagues for sure. We learn so much from each other. But the general public, I don't know how many times I've been asked, and I'm sure you've been asked, what is storytelling and how did you get into it? And we need to be able to tell those stories and be convincing with them so that other people will see the value of what we do beyond what most people are aware of, and that is the storyteller in the public library, and that's wonderful. But there is storytelling beyond that, as certainly all of you know. Anyway, I've been teaching college English for almost 30 years. And I retired. And a friend of mine who happened to be a librarian, a public librarian in Dallas, said to me, as I was floundering around thinking what I was going to do with my life, you ought to be a storyteller. And I, like some of you, I did not know that was a career choice. But she took me to the Texas Library Association conference in Corpus Christi, Texas. This was back in the early 1990s, I guess. And she took me to a storytelling concert. I'd never heard of such a thing. Finley Stewart, Tom McDermott, Shelley Cumbie Tucker were on the bill. And they were good. I still remember the stories they told. I was impressed. I was inspired. I thought, this is something I might want to do. So I began to do research. That's one thing you need to do to get into business of any sort. And I discovered the Tejas Storytelling Association, and I joined, and I discovered whatever iteration of the National Storytelling Network was at that time, and I joined that. I discovered there was a guild. In fact, there were a couple of them in the area. I was living at that, well, no, that would come later. At that point, I was still in the Rio Grande Valley where my husband was still teaching. So I knew that the RV resorts down there hired people to entertain the winter Texans. So I put together a do-it-yourself computer-generated brochure, sent it out to all those area RV parks, letting them know I was available. I had meanwhile stayed with that old adage about write or tell about what you know. I'm a bred and born Texan. I knew some Texas stories. I began to put together a program. I did Pecos Bill. I did a South Texas ghost story. I did the Legend of the Sand Dollar because we were down on the Gulf Coast. I put together about an hour's worth of program, and that was my preparation. From my marketing efforts, I got one response from the Sunshine Alveary Park in Harlingen, Texas. I think they'd had a cancellation of somebody they'd already booked, and so they asked me if I would come entertain the Winter Texans at an ice cream social on a Sunday afternoon. So I took my hour's worth of stories. I don't remember what I wore, but I'm guessing I wore something sort of denim-y and Texan-y. Arrived to discover they had a huge meeting room. I mean, this is one of the biggest RV parks, certainly in Texas, maybe the world. And there were all these people sitting around eating ice cream. And I did my hour's worth of stories, and they were amazingly attentive, these people sitting around eating ice cream. I had a great time. And I got paid $100. So I went home with my $100 check, and I was a professional storyteller because I had just gotten paid for telling stories. Later, I managed to get into some schools, and then we moved to the Austin area, and I had to start all over again. And at one of those opportunities is when I met Bernadette and followed her out to her car. She had just told that wombat stew story. I still remember your story, Bernadette. And I thought, again, I didn't think I was the only one by then because I had joined TSA, I had joined NSN or whatever it was then, but I hadn't met any storytellers, or many anyway, in my immediate area. And I thought, this woman is great. She needs to be in our guild. And so I think I invited you. I don't remember, Bernadette, but at any rate, I still didn't have any kind of plan. I mean, I was feeling my way along, and that's, I think, how a lot of us started out, and maybe some of us are still finding our way. Before I let you go, Bernadette, and I'm not wanting to run you off, by the way, but I know you want to check in on one of the other workshops. Since I would guess that you are the one among us who is most dependent on your income from storytelling and acting, I'm assuming you have to budget. I know you have to market, and I know you work hard at that. Those are two things that the Small Business Administration say we need to do in any small business. Addressing those two things before you go, how do you work out a budget? Because this is not something you can guarantee that you're going to have a certain amount of money every month coming in. And we have to prepare for emergencies and disasters and what have you. How do you deal with that?
Well, I could talk up until COVID. And COVID sort of changed everything for me, and I had to rethink, and I have had to rethink everything, along with going on Social Security, which frankly has helped me, because without it, I probably wouldn't have survived. But I worked out over a period of years which were the years that I would get booked most. Which were the months, sorry, that I would get booked most. And I knew, for example, that Halloween was always going to be a really good month. Thanksgiving stories would not quite such a good month, but December, always a huge month for storytelling. And then I would have quiet months, and then it would pick up again in March. April, before we did the testing in the schools, was a huge month for me. And then summer reading programs, they really developed over the years. So June and July became good months. So if I had some idea of what sort of money I was going to bring in those months, I could then budget for the months that I didn't get much storytelling. Well, April fell off the charts when the testing began. So then I had to rethink what was I going to do in April? How was I going to earn enough to survive in April? But I'll tell you that all of this would bring me only about 30,000 a year. So my entire storytelling income in a good year would bring me no more than $30,000. And most of us, I don't know, I always worked out that I needed 35 to 40,000 just to survive and pay the mortgage. So I would get the rest of my income doing theatre work and voiceover work and small pieces in movies and that sort of things just to survive. I had one tremendously good year when I got a contract with a school district, and that year, for the first time ever, I earned 60,000, and I thought, I've made it. From now on, I'm going to get at least 60,000 every year, and it never happened again. So, because this particular school district was one that liked to use a different person each year, and so I was probably going to wait 5 years before it happened again. So budgeting is really, really hard. And I can only say that if I were only doing storytelling, my normal amount that I bring in is about 20 to 25,000 a year. Most people can't survive. That's really, I think that's almost poverty level. I don't know the facts and figures about that. So I always had to diversify. I could never do just storytelling. So even though it's a full-time job, and the marketing, that, like they say, show business, the business is 95%, and then the show is about 5%. So most of my time is spent writing to libraries, school districts, anyone who might book me. And then it all fell apart in COVID, and I started taking Social Security. And frankly, now I get Social Security. If I earn 20,000 from storytelling, I can survive, when we finish paying off the mortgage. So, but for a young person, woo, you can't say charge more because libraries and schools can't afford more. And our own area, Austin ISD, is so completely broke. I mean, we're lucky if we get any kind of booking in our local district. I go to the Panhandle. I'm performing in the Panhandle. So I'm sorry, that's probably more than you needed to know.
No,
But
that's
I will just
wonderful.
say it's very difficult to make a living as a storyteller. Even if I were doing festivals, the way some of our folks do, the Andy Irwins and Bill Lepps, they have to get quite a lot of festivals to
Mhm.
survive. So you're always diversifying. You're always looking for ways, other places that you can do your storytelling, because the schools, the libraries, the festivals, I can only think of one person I know who probably is doing well with all of that, and that's Kim Whitecamp. And she works 24/7, and she is a brilliant marketer as well.
Mhm.
So if that gives you a sense. And by the way, I may not even be going to the other one. At the rate we're going, I'm enjoying this. So
Oh, good.
I'll shut up now.
Well, don't. Oh, I've been remiss. I didn't expand my gallery view to see that Rain Teller is here. Hello, Rain. We're glad to have you. And Michael, always glad to see you as well.
Can I tell you my story?
Tell us your story, Michael, and then we'll come back to you, Rain.
Oh, wait, you already had plans for Rain? Go.
No, the two of you. You go.
Okay. Uh, because a lot of what I heard from Bernadette just reminded me of my own path, and I started off wanting to be just a speaker, a motivator, or whatever. From having those kind of coaches and those kind of people, I was a little bitty guy always growing up, so that kind of motivational stuff and that rah rah you can do it stuff was always a part of me, and I wanted to be a speaker, a motivational speaker, and I used to listen to all the the tapes of the Les Browns and all those kind of folks, Jack Canfield and all of them. And one time I actually went to a workshop that Les Brown had in Chicago to learn how to speak. And we had a table of 8 people around the table. You know how they do it, and everybody tells their story, and they vote on it, and the winner goes up and all that stuff. And I was the worst one at the group, and I acted like a little baby, went off crying about, oh, I can't do this and all that stuff. And uh, I hate to say it like this, but this is probably the better part of the story. I've grown a lot since then. But a little bitty small white girl who happened to be gay at the time, who told a story about adopting a black child, all which went against everything I was back then. She was the one who said, "Michael, you can do this." And she talked to me. I owe her so much. And she told me to go back and join Toastmasters, which I did. And that turned out to be, oh, there's people doing this stuff, and it's not just this stuff out here I was seeing. With the Les Brown, the Jack Canfield quote star type people. And I joined not one, but two, three. I joined a whole bunch of Toastmasters groups so that I could learn how to do it, and I could do it over and over and over again. And I was living in St. Louis at the time, and I would win all the contests, and I did all the stuff except being the number one in the world. And I did that for like 4 or 5 years. Then I moved to Texas, and the same thing started to happen. And so they put me in the Hall of Fame so that I wouldn't be in the contest anymore. And that's when I learned about the National Speakers Association. And Toastmasters, I always say, teaches you how to speak, but NSA, they teach you how to get paid. And I would go to all these, now they charge a whole lot to be in the group, and all the stuff would cost a bunch. And I would go to all these meetings, and people would give me all this information. I had all these handouts, but I wasn't really doing the work, and you got to the point where I had so much information. Why did I need to keep paying the dues and paying all that money to go get this information if I wasn't going to actually do the work? But what I would do is I'd go to the conference and stuff, and I would get a chance to meet all these great speakers, Mark Victor Hansen, Jack Canfield, I would hang out with all these guys. And I found out that one, they pulled up their pants just like me. Two, some of them were drunks. Some of them were, womenizers. That was a stage thing. And that was like, oh my goodness. And found out like Les Brown tells a story about how he lived on the office floor and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, and I had a good job working for Southwestern Bell. And everybody was saying, oh, you have to chase your dream and give up your good job and all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, but they don't make as much money as I'm making over here. And then a guy came to speak at Southwestern Bell who a black guy came, and he was at the speaker at this big town hall meeting, and they treated him like he was all of that. And his dad owned the local club that we went to for happy hour. He was just another guy. And I said, well, wait a minute. He's coming to speak at my company? And back then I was into that motivational stuff. And they say that, how you talk to yourself makes a difference. And I literally started defining myself as a speaker who worked for Southwestern Bell. And when people would ask me, what do you do? I'm a speaker who works for Southwestern Bell. Even though I was into computers and all that stuff, that was always my answer. And people started inviting me to speak at their little team group meetings, then the department head meetings, the district head meetings. And, it's part of the job. I just would go away, speak, and come back and do the job. And that would happen over and over. And then they started paying me out of their little budgets. And it got to the point where as long as my job was done, by the time I'd moved to Texas, as long as my job was done, my boss didn't really care what I was doing because I was a salary employee and all that. And I literally was able to work for, by then we were SBC, then AT&T. I was able to work for a big corporation where all these speakers were talking about, they were dying to go work for these folks. And I was already working there and I was already speaking there. And I would get up on some mornings and fly to Connecticut, go speak, fly back home. And that was my job. I literally made a speaking job at my job and kept my job. And then, later on, I eventually retired and now I'm retired. So now I've got, pension, Social Security. So now I can go out there and it doesn't matter. And now my thing is, because I always thought that people charge so darn much for those speakers. And I've been the head of organizations just like Tejas all along. And it's like, how can people do that? And these people talk about $10,000 for a speaking engagement and all that stuff. It's like, so my thing is, I want to be the best speaker that you can possibly get. and not have to worry about, whatever your budget is, I can deal with that. I'll work with that because I see that being such a bad thing. And then I learned that if you want to be a good speaker, well, you have to tell good stories. Well, I met Reagan Holtz. I don't know if you guys remember Reagan, but Reagan brought me to the Dallas Storytelling Guild, which got me to North 40 up in Plano. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, wow, all these people are doing it. And ever since then, I've been a part of Tejas and that. So now I probably get a paid gig once a month, and that's cool. And it's just enough. And if they can pay me, a bunch, then that's cool. If they can't, then that's cool too. And the good thing about this particular workshop is now that I'm no longer president, it's like I got time. I got a whole bunch of time. And for the last 2.5 years, it's been like a part-time job. I get up and that's what I can, do that more than 20 hours a week. And I don't expect other folks to have that kind of time. I just had that kind of time. But now I don't have anything else to do. So I did what you normally do in 2026 when you don't know what to do. I went and said, hey, Chat GPT, based on everything that you know about me up to now, what do you think I should do now that I'm not going to be president? And it said, well, that's just what I knew I should do. Concentrate on the YouTube channel that you already have. Concentrate on the website that you already have. Concentrate on the business and the 4 books that you've already written. And just build up your business and do that. It's like, oh, yeah, that's cool. So that's my story. But the big thing part was, that money thing. I think with young people, people try to trap them on that thing about, oh, come out here and do your great thing and you'll make all that much money. But then when I started looking deeper, and then when I got to be, in Tejas, and I know how much we pay featured tellers, and we pay them $2,000 to do that, okay? And $2,000 for 50 weeks gets you only $100,000 a year. And nowadays, my grandsons come out of college making that kind of money. So, it's hard to make money, I think, in the business. But if I can do something like we do now with, or the association, and that's a way of supporting speaking and storytelling and getting the word out and still making sure people can have good speakers and not have to go break the bank for it, then I'm happy. And right now I'm happy. That's my story.
Good, Michael, and thank you for the time you devoted being president. It's been a wonderful couple of years, so thank you for that.
Thanks, Donna.
And you brought up some things I want us to follow up on. Certainly, storytelling as a career, as a business, is no way to become rich or famous. We know the people who have risen, I guess, to some public recognition nationwide or beyond and universally. We know them, but a lot of other people don't. You start dropping names like Donald Davis, and then people give you a blank stare. They don't know who he is unless they're part of the community. And so, and hardly anybody that I can think of would be what I'd call rich in money. But if we think of storytelling as almost a kind of calling, then and something that brings us pleasure, certainly, and fulfillment, then that's reward in and of itself, I think. I know that the late great Catherine Tucker Wyndham had wonderful things to say about storytelling and the importance of storytelling. And she did not ever want to be considered a performer. She was a storyteller, and she would tell you the same story with the same emphasis and the same kind of attitude across the table at dinner as she would from the stage. She was what I call an authentic storyteller, which I think is what we all aspire to give that sense among ourselves, certainly, but also to listeners of any sort. And Rain, I want to come to you now because I know you are that kind of teller. You are the one who can certainly tell a story from the stage, but it would be with the same authenticity that you would tell it as you were sitting around in our living room not long ago, sharing stories with Liz Weir and a bunch of other people. So you are a designated storyteller uh, in in a very real sense that even has a title, I think. So tell us about your origin story, how you evolved into the storyteller you are.
I'm sorry you can't see me. We had this problem yesterday, but you can hear me. Um, God made me a storyteller. When I was a child, my recollection, about 4 years old, my poppy, my maternal grandfather, was a lay rabbi who didn't get ordained because the czar conscripted him, and he escaped and came to America, and his father-in-law had passed. So he was a rabbi, and he was also the owner of a pastrami restaurant. So he developed pancreatic cancer before anything could be done about pancreatic cancer. My parents, we all lived in a boarding house, and my parents and my 3 uncles and their wives all went out to work. And Nanny, Poppy's wife, she went to the restaurant every day to take cash. And Poppy stayed home with this little nudnik, and he would tell me stories. He never told me stories about the czar and that whole story. I found that out years later. But every day when Uncle Julie or Uncle Irv came home for coffee at 10 o'clock from the restaurant, only one would come, the other one would stay. Nanny would go back to the restaurant, and Poppy would have a shopping bag full of pastrami and corned beef sandwiches, and oh my God. So what we did was every day, 6 days a week, because we were Shomer Shabbos, which means we didn't work on the Shabbos, we would pick a different church in the neighborhood, and we would go to the rectory, knock on the door, and they loved us. I mean, they loved us. To this day, I'm still meeting people in Austin, Texas, who remember my grandparents and the Goodmans of Elmora in Elizabeth, New Jersey. It's weird. One guy even said, "You're that little girl with curls that used to spin the stools." I almost fell over. Anyway, we would go to these churches and they would say, "Oh, Izzy," my grandfather's name was Isidore, called him Izzy. "Izzy, is she going to tell us a story today?" And Izzy would look at me and he'd say, "Libela," that's my Hebrew name, "Libela, tell Father Michael a story." By the way, I used to have a descant soprano voice. So Friday nights, Father Michael would show up at my grandmother's Shabbos table because she cooked like nobody I know. And on Sunday morning, I would be walked to Father Michael's church to sing in the choir. To this day, sometimes I walk around the house singing that very high, anyway. So besides telling stories that way, we all sat down for dinner in my grandmother's kitchen, big kitchen, huge table. So there's 5 couples and 4 kids. And my poppy would say to my father, may he rest in peace, Davy, my big shot college guy. My father was the only one that went to college. Tell us a story. Well, he was working at Macy's part-time in the packing department. So he would tell us stories, whatever. We'd go around the whole table. Leopold sitting next to Izzy. Izzy would say, and now I'd like to present. Honey, tell a story. And I would tell a story about where we went and who, whatever. I taught for 50 years in every ghetto possible. I taught in South California with the gangs. I taught in San Francisco with more gangs. I taught at Chino, which is a boys' reform school. I even entertained at Folsom once. I came back to New Jersey. I taught Hebrew school. I taught Hillel, Jewish kids who get a very Jewish education. And then I would come in at 4:00 when they were tired and disgusted to teach them to pass the SAT test.
Rain, I'm going to interrupt you only because, and it's my fault, we are getting close to the end of what I'm hearing from you is that among us, I would say you probably have the longest history as a storyteller. If you started at that age and had a wonderful family that was also storytelling, and that's a wonderful background for you. I wanted to kind of wrap up with a few of the small business things that we've touched on here. The doing the market research, what's out there, who's out there. Doc Moore and Tim Tingle early on told me the only advice they gave me was to join everything I could afford to join and go to everything I could go to. And I started doing that, as some of you have said here, and made the discovery that I was not the only storyteller in the world, and that there were some wonderful ones out there, and they were people I could learn from, and I have over the years. One other suggestion that the Small Business Administration made was to choose your business name. Now, most of us use our own name. Some people add a descriptor to their identity. Lucas Miller, for example, calls himself the singing zoologist, and he like Fran, is a resource particularly for science stories, and that's pretty much what he does with his multimedia program that he does. He's coming to our library here in Bertram this summer. Others develop things that we know them by recognition. I guess the late Angela Lloyd, I will always think of with her washboard and her sunbrella. I now think of Donald Davis as very dapper with the bow ties. He actually started out telling Jack tales sitting on a front porch in a flannel shirt. So he evolved his image anyway evolved, as well as his repertoire. Willie Claflin, I think, is going to be at the national conference in Canyon. Maynard the Moose, we all know. Andy Offutt Irwin can't get away, not that he wants to, from Aunt Marguerite and his whistling. So that people develop over time with their talents, with the actual stories they tell. I mentioned Catherine Tucker Wyndham. I always think of her story about, she started out telling ghost stories, partly about Jeffrey, the poltergeist that lived in her house. But then she evolved into a personal storyteller, teller of personal stories. I always remember the one about her coffin. I think we all do. She shared with us superstitions that were not really stories. I never eat the point of the pie first. And she taught us things about you don't want to put sugar in your cornbread. I mean, these were basic. She was a folklorist as well as a storyteller, and that's a very close partnership. So anyway, think about your identity as a storyteller. Dealing with, we haven't talked much about the actual business part. Dealing with tax ID numbers. If you're going to sell stuff, you need to get a state sales tax number. You need to keep really good records for that and for the federal income tax. I don't know. I know Elizabeth Ellis has been audited, I know, at least twice, because sometimes they're wondering, is this really something you can write off? If you can afford it, it's good to work with a CPA, I guess, to help you through all that kind of. And that's another thing. Are you gonna hire consultants? You're gonna have a web guru? I do, because I don't know how to do it. Are you gonna have a videographer? And we haven't even gotten to the Texas Commission on the Arts as a real business advantage. If you have not thought about applying to be on the roster, the touring roster of the Texas Commission on the Arts. And I suppose, is there something like that in Oklahoma too? An arts council that gives grants?
There was an arts council that supported school residencies. I worked with that program for many years. But in order to get on the touring register, you have to have a set show. They cannot comprehend that you have a repertory of 400 stories and could custom. They just absolutely, I've tried a couple times.
Yeah, that's pretty limiting. Well, fortunately for us, the Texas one is very broadly based about storytelling. The key to some of us have just reapplied and we're wiping the sweat off if we stayed on, because here's what TCA does. It doesn't get you bookings, doesn't do any marketing for you. It gives grants to schools, libraries, any governmental agency that will pay up to half of your fees and expenses. The presenter, school or the library, whatever, has to make the application in order for that to happen. In order to apply to stay on the roster, to get on the roster and stay on the roster, there is a form to fill out. That's not all that difficult. The key to success, we've all discovered, is the video. You're required to send in a video of 4 minutes or less of you actually performing or doing a workshop or whatever. And the quality of that video is often very important to your success or failure. So we all sweat that. So I hire a videographer. So there are people who can be consultants, can help you with that. And managing finances, we've talked about that a little bit. What are your startup costs? Are you going to invest in sound equipment? Have you got a reliable car and a little gas money? All of those things are things you have to consider up front. I'm assuming you've all done that already. Preparing for emergencies or disasters. We've got like 1 minute left. I want to mention, Bernadette mentioned COVID. Out of COVID, what did we learn as a business? We learned about Zoom. We learned that we could do things online. We don't like it as well as we do in person. Elizabeth Ellis is still doing Zoom programs once a month.
Mm-hmm.
Free, but certainly you're invited to donate. There are people who have kind of co-opted partnership together. There's artists standing strong together, a group of artists who come together. They have produced, getting back to what Fran was talking about earlier, they have produced programs, again, mostly on Zoom. Ann Rutherford and Norm Breck do the Good Liars Club showcase every year. It's an all-day thing. Bernadette's been on it. I get to do it this year again. And the income for the storyteller is not great. It's whatever money is donated through the day is divided up. I think, I don't know, I got like $75 or something, but it's fun. And so people began to discover ways to recover from that disaster that was COVID. And we're still doing some of that, discovering new venues that have opened up basically because of online things. And another thing is, what do you do if you're on your way to a gig and your car breaks down? Do you have somebody you can call? Do you have backup people, or you get sick? You can cancel, of course, but if you can provide a suggestion anyway for someone else who might fill in for you, then certainly the presenter appreciates that. And we've done that for each other, and we do that for each other. And that's part of that collegiality I was talking about. And then, the growing your business, that never stops. And you're learning and you're developing, that never stops either. So actually we're done. I mean, I'm done. If you have any parting shots, I'm sure there are things we didn't get to that you might have wanted to, anything that we can handle if we're actually past our point. Oh, and I never did get the code word. If those of you who might be doing continuing ed, Viveka, do you have that? Do you know what the code word is? I think there's supposed to be.
It's in the folder, and
Oh, it's in the folder.
Everybody has
I'll
that
be able to link
question.
it so they can find it in the folder.
Then I'm not going to worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
Thank you
And
all
guys, you
for.
can always go back to the main room too. Remember, we got a half-hour break before the next workshop. You can go to the main room and tell stories or talk amongst yourself. Either way, it's a good day. Thank you, Donna.
All right.
you.
Thank you all for being here and for sharing.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.